Good day, everyone. On behalf of 327 Solutions and Parava Cyber Consulting, I have the pleasure to present to you a discussion of our first course offering, which is Supply Chain Risk Management Considerations for Cyber, specifically geared towards the Department of Defense. The module that we are going to be talking about in this webinar is our intended Module 5, which deals with the Department of Defense Instruction 5000.90. My name is Ted Jekanowski. I am your presenter. I have certifications from ISACA for CISA, CISM, and CRISC, along with CDP-SE, that is their privacy certification. And from ISC Square, I hold the CAP, CISSP, and CCSP certifications. For those of you who wish to contact me or who have some suggestions about the content, I have my LinkedIn profile on the screen. The certification that is most relevant to our discussion today is the CAP certification. The CAP certification is a course that I'm very proud to teach. I've taught it all over the world, and it specifically deals with the NIST special publication of 837, in particular R2. Now, where that is going to have some relevancy for our discussion today is that you are going to see lots of references in the Department of Defense Instruction 5000.90 to risk management. And whenever that is done, they are specifically referring to that document. One of the things my colleagues and I are very proud of is the concept that we have of promoting the National Institute of Standards and Technology's National Initiative for Cybersecurity and Education. What the National Institute of Standards and Technology has done is identified various competencies. And the competencies that we cover in Module 5 include leadership, where students will learn about policy development and strategic planning. The competency type of organizational implies they will learn things about contracting and procurement, law, policies, and ethics, organizational awareness, project management, risk management, strategic relationship management, and supply chain management. The final competency type that we cover in our course is going to include the technical aspects of data security, information system and network security, information technology assessment, requirements analysis, software development, software testing and evaluation. Due to time constraints, we cannot cover everything in our full one-day class on the Department of Defense Instruction 5000.90, but what we will be covering in our introduction is an overview as to the why DoD Instruction 5000.90 exists. We'll go into the particulars, the rationale behind 5000.90, and we will focus primarily on procedures that are supposed to be followed by program managers. In our full course offering, we'll be talking in depth about the documentation that is referenced in the Department of Defense 5000.90, the various roles and responsibilities, and something we feel that is a unique viewpoint in examining the Department of Defense Instruction 5000.90. And that is, we are going to be discussing the tasks that are often referenced within this particular instruction. Certainly 2020 has been a very interesting year in terms of supply chain. We have all witnessed either a lack of toilet paper or a lack of medical supplies, personal protective equipment. Certainly supply chain has been a very hot topic as far as the community goes, and the globe for that matter. However, the Department of Defense in particular has had some very interesting problems around supply chain risk management, and there have been various GAO, that is Government Accounting Office reports, that provide an indication as to the severity of situations where certain components that are key to weapon systems are found to be produced by people who may not have our best intentions at heart. So to encourage this, there is a lot of mention within 837 R2 of the need to have supply chain risk management. So what we're going to be seeing is a continual reference to the risk management framework, which, by the way, is a requirement under FISMA for government agencies to use, and the need to identify the supply chain and to minimize the risk of either information being disclosed in an unintentional manner or the supply chain itself introducing additional vulnerabilities. Now, the Department of Defense has something that is referred to as a defense acquisition system. And the intent is to embed cybersecurity and, more importantly, cyber risk management practices whenever something is going to be purchased. 5090, that is Department of Defense Instruction 5090, has several components associated with it. There is a purpose description within that document. And what it states is that this directive establishes a policy, holds individuals responsible and ultimately accountable, and it prescribes very specific procedures that are supposed to be followed by program decision authorities, and you'll hear the term authorizing official a little bit later on, and program managers. Acquisition process needs to be compliant with other Department of Defense directives and or instructions, with the one that is probably the most interesting because it ties back into the risk management framework, being Department of Defense Instruction 8510.01. So this is where the Department of Defense adopted the risk management framework that is used by every other federal agency. So you may also see this whole direction of supply chain risk management in other agencies in the near future as well. In terms of applicability to Department of Defense Instruction 5090, it literally applies to everyone in the Department of Defense, from the Office of Secretary of Defense through the different military departments, through the Office of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Joint Staff, the different combatant commands, regardless of service, the Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Defense, who will be providing oversight of this, the different defense agencies, the Department of Field Activities, and all other organizational entities within the Department of Defense. The policy within Department of Defense Instruction 5090 is considered now to be foundational. There is a process that we are going to be discussing called the Adaptive Acquisition Framework, which has more detailed references in Department of Defense Instruction 5002. One of the first signs of the necessity of dealing with cybersecurity threats is going to come from something called the Validated Online Lifecycle Threat, or you can have an equivalent threat assessment, which may come from the intelligence community, which we will be talking about a little bit later. So the Validated Online Lifecycle Threat, or VAULT, is a regulatory document for acquisition category 1 through 3 programs. So in other words, it is not optional. These reports, these programs are all going to require unique system-specific VAULT reports to support capability development, especially against adversaries, and program manager assessments of mission needs and capability gaps against likely threat capabilities at what is referred to as the initial operational capability. And these VAULT reports are required. They are not optional. So you will have program managers looking at individual systems, looking at the various threats and vulnerabilities that have been identified from the various components in the supply chain and making recommendations as to further establishing controls based upon the findings of the Vault reports. In Part C of policy, you have planning and implementation requiring specific changes to program engineering and supply chain risk management processes. Now, there are documents that are referred to in the risk management framework, in particular, NIST Special Publication 800-160, Volumes 1 and 2, which give you the guidance necessary to securely commit an engineering process to a particular program. One of the other areas of concern is that threats evolve. There is a concept referred to as threat shifting. Threat shifting implies that I may have established a control and put a control into place, but things change over time. And the idea of just building a system and ignoring it for a period of time can no longer be. As we've seen with things like solar winds, problems can come up immediately or suddenly and have an immediate impact upon the environment. There is this particular document and instruction, Department of Defense Instruction 5000.90, specifically incorporates and cancels something referred to as an enclosure 13 of Department of Defense Instruction 5000.02 T, and the T stands for transitional. As we talked a little bit about earlier, cybersecurity is going to be woven into the defense acquisition system with the intent of hardening weapons systems and infrastructure. The department is required and mandated by this instruction for program managers to inoculate cybersecurity in all aspects of the defense acquisition system and operations. The scope of this inoculation includes platforms, weapons, and the idea of the defense industrial base itself being regularly assessed, properly resourced, and more importantly, continuously mitigated. And cybersecurity applies across all pathways within the adaptive acquisition framework. Now, we don't have time to go over this in detail. However, as you can see by this diagram, you have different pathways, including urgent capability acquisition, a middle tier of acquisition, major capability acquisition, software acquisition, defense business systems, and the acquisition of services. And each of these pathways will be discussed in detail in our full course offering, which will be available probably Q3 of this year. Let's briefly talk about the differences between these different adaptive acquisition framework pathways. The first one is an urgent capability acquisition. Here, what we're looking to do is to field capabilities to fulfill urgent, existing, or emerging operational needs, or quick reactions in less than 2 years. The middle tier of acquisition is used to rapidly develop fieldable prototypes within an acquisition program to demonstrate new capabilities and/or rapidly field production quantities of system with proven technologies that require minimal development. A major capability acquisition is used to acquire and modernize military unique programs. Software acquisition as a pathway to facilitate rapid and iterative delivery of software capabilities to a user. Defense business systems is a pathway to acquire information that supports DoD business operations. That particular pathway, this is the defense business system. You're looking at business capabilities and their supporting business systems, including as-a-service solutions, which I would take to imply cloud. It could include financial and financial data feeds, contracting, logistics, planning and budgeting, installation maintenance, human resource management, training and readiness systems, and it can be used to acquire non-developmental software intensive programs that are not business systems. Acquisition of services is the final one. It's a pathway for the acquisition of contracted services with a total estimated value at or above the simplified acquisition threshold. That simplified acquisition threshold is set by a federal acquisition regulation at 48 CFR subpart 2.1 in accordance with 41 United States Code 1908. At the moment, the threshold is around $150,000, but it can be adjusted periodically to account for inflation as needed. So now what we're going to be going over are the different procedures that program managers are supposed to be following. Where it is appropriate, we're going to talk a little bit about the risk management framework as we go through this. Procedure number one is the idea of inoculating cybersecurity foundations into the defense acquisition system. As you can see as one of the bullet points, and is specifically referenced in 5000.90, cybersecurity is something that is going to be considered all the time. It is going to be regularly, if not continuously, assessed. It needs now to be properly resourced. And you've seen this recently with some of the more interesting vulnerabilities that have been discovered. That is the idea of being able to be continuously mitigated. And that is, of course, a large part of risk management. Risk management is not static. It is a very dynamic activity. It is not the idea of going through a checklist and signing off on something and you're done. No, that's not going to be the case. Now, one of the other areas that they bring in here is the requirement, and by extension to the program manager, of the Department of Defense to inoculate security into all aspects of acquisition, systems, and operations. So one of the things they talk about here is this idea of an environment of operation. So you could conceivably have a system which, when it is in a data center, might be perfectly secure. But if it had to be deployed in the field, say at a forward operating base, well, you would still need to maintain that capability of cybersecurity, irregardless of where something is deployed. It doesn't make any difference whether it is on land or whether it is at sea. It needs to prevail at all times. And so controls are going to be appropriately put into place to ensure that that is what happens. I would like, again, for you to pay attention specifically to the concepts of risk management being discussed here. When a program manager is looking at a program from a risk management perspective, one of the things that they are bringing up here, and this is very evident in the new version of the RMF and the prepare task, you are going to be looking at cybersecurity early, especially in the software development process. So if, as an example, you are defining requirements, well, you're going to look at what vulnerabilities might exist because you have developed these requirements. And how do I prevent a threat from exploiting the vulnerabilities? And I would like to do it earlier, because if I do it later in the software development cycle, it is very likely to perhaps introduce new vulnerabilities, or perhaps render some of the controls that I originally put into place as not as effective as they might be. So one of the concerns that we have here is that when throughout the life cycle of a system, and by the way, the life cycle of a system can include its disposal, that's going to be a requirement for the program manager to continuously review the system to make sure the controls remain effective. Now, one of the points that they are making here is the use of the risk management framework. The risk management framework has 7 steps in it and approximately 52 tasks. So the program manager is throughout the life cycle of that system going to continuously be looking at the risk management framework, as well as the supply chain risk management of the entire supply chain as a system is either being developed, deployed, or retired. Doesn't really matter. Someone, as a program manager, is going to need to have the following documented. That first, cybersecurity is going to be addressed in every acquisition program using any of the acquisition pathways. And it really doesn't matter as to the type or nature of data, because all data has value. Even if the data was unclassified, the program manager is still going to consider the cybersecurity ramifications of a particular program. The program manager is also going to be looking at risk management throughout the entire acquisition and sustainment lifecycle. So when you're talking about the sustainment lifecycle, you will be talking about configuration management and change control. The second procedure brings up some very interesting points. First, this is a requirement. You're going to be performing the following risk management activities when evaluating a system. So when they talk about the intelligence community, there are 16 agencies involved with the intelligence community. So the aggregate of all of the data captured by the intelligence community regarding potential threats to a given system is supposed to be considered. Program managers are also supposed to be consulting with intelligence and security credentialed professionals to obtain cyber threat and security inputs to the program and risk management framework process. In particular, if you were to look in the roles and responsibility matrices within the risk management framework, there are certain certifications that qualify you to hold a particular position within the Department of Defense. The standard, if you will, is 8140 or 8570. So because I hold the CAP certification and a couple of other certifications, I'm qualified as a cybersecurity professional to be dealing with information assurance, to be a manager for that. Now, I briefly need to discuss what an authority to operate is. First, an authority to operate, you would look at in a very similar manner to obtaining a driver's license from a government agency. That driver's license allows you to drive a vehicle at a prescribed speed on prescribed roads of a particular vehicle type. And that's what an authority to operate is. The individual who is going to be issuing this authority to operate is referred to as an authorizing official. So the program manager is going to be working with an authorizing official who is governance over a specific who has governance with a specific authorization boundary. And 8510 is the mechanism where the Department of Defense adopted the risk management framework. Now, there are different kinds of authorities to operate. It's not just a blanket one size fits all. You can have an authority to operate. You can authorize the use of common controls. You can use the authority to operate from another organization with an authorization to use. And finally, and this is the consequence of a program manager not following everything necessary, an authorizing official can also issue a denial of authorization. Now, when the program manager is presenting the evidence to the authorizing official, you need to think of it very much like a courtroom proceeding. The program manager is going to be gathering documentation from every potential resource to describe how the system is going to behave. So it doesn't really make any difference how many companies are involved. Each of them is going to be part of a system security plan, which will be assessed by a control assessor who will generate a report And if there is anything within that report that needs remediation, all three documents are what is presented to an authorizing official so that they can make a decision as to whether to issue an authority to operate or not. One of the other elements that we talked a little bit about before, there are certain things that they are referencing in this particular instruction that may or may not change over time or because of different circumstances. So one of the things that is what typically happens, and this was originally mandated by the Office of Management and Budget, was the maximum length of an authorization to an authority to operate was 3 years. Now, there's nothing to say, by the way, that it could not be shorter. It could be a day if that's what you wanted to do. You could have something referred to as an interim authority to test, where if I needed to put a system onto the network, I still have a degree of uncertainty as to whether the controls work, but I need to test it in a production environment. So what I will be doing in that situation is I will be getting an interim authority to test, which allows me to put my system on the network for further testing, but that's all I can do. Now, the idea behind this, that is the authorization of the authority to operate needing to be updated at least every 3 years. There is a caveat to that, and that is going to refer to that caveat to the idea of continuous monitoring of the effectiveness of controls. In that case, what you would be getting instead of an authority to operate dependent on a 3-year cycle would be an ongoing authorization where you could have one of two things happen. If you change the system significantly, you might be required to go through this process all over again. Think of it as going from a version 1 to a version 2, or you could conceivably have it something that is event-driven. Oh, we got hacked and we found that the controls were not as effective as we thought they were. So the person who is the authorizing official has the discretion of withdrawing the authority to operate at any time, assuming that there was a threat significant enough where the authorizing official was unwilling to accept risk and where mission priorities did not play a role. Mission can always win. Now, one of the points that is part of this instruction is the idea of having a threat assessment of the system be current. So what you are looking for here is at least a threat assessment occurring 12 months prior to the issuance of the authority to operate. That again is to inform the authorizing official of the nature of the threats and the controls that were put into place to mitigate the risk. Also, in Procedure 2, something I consider perhaps to be the most difficult aspect of all of this, and that is continuous cyber threat analysis. Now, I've been involved in putting together or delivering products that did monitoring. And of course, the problem with that is at what thresholds do you set? So program managers are supposed to maintain awareness of threat actor activities that could impact the platform, enterprise, or mission. And to an extent, the push to continuous diagnostic mitigation and continuous monitoring will provide the program managers with the dashboards necessary to know if anything is going wrong. The authorizing officials, by the way, will also be sharing in this information, and they too need to have an understanding as to how well things are working. The second item here in the continuous cyber threat analysis is that if there is something new or previously unaddressed, the program manager is going to initiate a risk assessment to identify the risk to the platform. So discovering a 0-day, discovering a particular piece of software or a particular hardware component was manufactured in a country that was perhaps not as friendly to our interest. If that's the case, then the program manager needs to conduct a risk assessment and make a decision about what changes need to be made to that system and what additional controls will need to be put into place. You're also now looking at the idea of a cyber survivability risk posture to see whether a program has already planned for an emerging threat and related or supported missions. So I guess a very good example of that happened recently in the United States with the Colonial Pipeline suffering a ransomware attack on its financial systems. In that particular case, the flow of fuel to the eastern part of the United States was hampered, and that was a threat that had not been accounted for, at least initially. So again, this idea of events spiraling out of control and taking down systems now is becoming more of a reality and something of greater concern. When tailoring is discussed, tailoring is very much like going out and buying a suit of clothes. Sometimes the suit of clothes just fits fine off the peg or the rack. Other times, the suit needs to be taken in a little bit or let out a little bit. Well, it's exactly the same thing here. There is a degree of latitude given to program managers. So one of the things, they are bringing up several different aspects of this, and that the first one being that the cybersecurity authority to operate is a requirement for systems in operational use that ensures that the cybersecurity controls incorporated into it enable it to remain effective, especially in a cyber contested environment. Now, IS stands for information system. A PIT system is a category of both IT hardware and software that is part of or dedicated to or essential in real time to the mission performance of a special purpose system. So you could look at a PIT as being the computer that might exist on a helicopter to control the behavior of the blades. Same kind of idea. You're also looking at a reference again to the risk management framework and the Department of Defense Instruction 85.10.01, that the authority to operate is going to be issued by an authorizing official based on the technical findings of a security control assessor. Now, I've been involved in enough situations to understand that an authorizing official does not necessarily have to accept the technical findings of a security control assessor, but it is part of the body of evidence that is going to be examined by the authorizing official when they are making their decision as to whether a system should be placed on the network or not. The final part of tailoring is having the program manager working with either an authorizing official or a decision authority, tailoring the RMF process to give you an authority to operate commensurate with the cyber risk of the program. And what I have seen in my experience is where sometimes mission will triumph over the technical requirements. So if something has to go bang, an authorizing official and a decision authority does have the right to accept a little bit more cyber risk than they otherwise might. These are going to be some of the things that in Procedure 3, a program manager needs to do. Now, one of the points, and I apologize, I should have really made this reference a little bit earlier. When I teach the risk management framework classes and I teach the implementation of controls, I always think it's good to have two different perspectives. The perspective is somebody who needs to implement the controls and the technical requirements of that, but also understanding what the requirements are going to be of the person who is going to be assessing those controls. So from the perspective of your company providing services to the Department of Defense, it's a really good idea to understand what it is a program manager needs to look at and do, and what they are going to ultimately be held accountable for. So as far as the cybersecurity planning activities, the first item is that the program manager is responsible and therefore accountable for not only operational cybersecurity, but supply chain resilience. So one could anticipate program managers being a lot more inquisitive as to the supply chain resilience of any supplier. So as an example, if you're dependent on a chip maker, and if that chip maker happens to catch fire and they were the only chip maker, well, that is something that the program manager needs to take into consideration. Program manager is going to delegate the creation of a cybersecurity annex, a strategy annex program of a program protection plan. So a cybersecurity annex is going to document how the system operates in a cyber contested environment. If you have a platform or a weapon system that requires an authority to operate in accordance with DoD Instruction 8510, the cybersecurity annex is going to document a plan of action and milestone to address any vulnerabilities. So the plan of action and milestones is interesting because what it represents is a finding by a control assessor that a control did not behave in the manner it was supposed to. The POAM, that is the plan of action and milestones, will not only contain address and about vulnerabilities about your own system, but if you inherit common controls from, let's say, hypothetically, a cloud provider, those also wind up on your POAM. It is part of the body of evidence that an authorizing official is going to look at as they are assessing your program. I'm going to maintain that this is going to be the hardest thing to do. That is the implementation of continuous monitoring of risk on cyber threats, vulnerabilities, and mitigation. The system security plan, the security assessment report, and the plan of action and milestones are all to be considered living documents that need to be constantly maintained. If they are not properly maintained, then the authorizing official no longer has that reliability or assurance that they are looking at a complete body of evidence where they should be accepting risk on your behalf. So again, that's hard. Implementation of the RMF process within the program management's office acquisition and engineering processes for development, procurement, testing, and sustainment. So these are individual components that are evaluated as part of the whole. Finally, the need for operational cyber resilience, and if appropriate, the resulting monitoring, responding, and recovering of the system and the mitigation of vulnerabilities. You could look again at the Colonial Pipeline situation where if you, well, in that particular case, they paid the ransomware, but if you didn't have a capability to either pay or if you didn't have the proper backup, you would not be able to restore the system. And so that would be an example of recovering the system and mitigating the vulnerabilities by then patching what was ever broken. Additionally, in Procedure 3, these are things that are supposed to happen. Program managers are going to need to allocate resources and personnel to mitigate cyber risk. Now, there's actually two different viewpoints of this. We really don't know because DoD 5000.90 only came out in December last year as to the amount of resources that are going to be needed to mitigate cyber risk. Certainly there is a problem obtaining the appropriate number of personnel to mitigate cyber risk. So where these people are coming from is going to be a problem that needs to be addressed long term. Program managers also need to have threat representative adversarial assessments done. You could read that as a pen test, if you will, a penetration test, to make sure that the cybersecurity of the cyber technologies in the material solution work the way that they are supposed to. If you have an authority to operate required, there are circumstances where especially for something like a PIT system, the controls are assessed, but you don't get an authorization to operate. Somebody is going to be the person responsible, and that authorizing official needs to be informed of cyber risk, threats, and associated mitigation for the program to operate in a threat-informed, cyber-contested environment. So the authorizing official, who is going to be a government employee accepting risk on behalf of the United States government, in this case, the Defense Department, has a particular unique responsibility. And they are going to need to understand 5090 as much as you, any people, anyone here who sells to the Department of Defense. And the authorization of the authorizing official will also be determined based on the authorization boundary of a system. So if it's a cloud system, somebody's going to be accountable for that entire cloud environment. If it was just in an enclave, then the AO would be responsible for solely that enclave. There is also this idea of cybersecurity planning and execution. We're going to see a diagram about that in a second, where I've got some thoughts on that particular slide. It is about the implementation of threat-based cybersecurity throughout the acquisition lifecycle. The program managers are going to be held accountable for designing, building, testing, fielding, and sustaining their product. When they talk about sustaining their product, here we're talking about configuration management and change control. There is a necessity on the part of the program manager to develop a cybersecurity strategy, which will go all the way through the RMF cycle, the process, leading to the authority to operate and ongoing authority to operate until the system is retired. And even when the system is retired, then the authority to operate is removed. Another part of cybersecurity planning and execution is you have program managers working with the authorizing officials, continuously revisiting the cybersecurity posture based on threat assessments. This is something we talked a little bit about earlier, the idea of a continuous ATO. But the big problem with that is the development of a robust automated monitoring capability, where the objective is to know in real time whether a threat shifting event had rendered a control to be ineffective. Ideally, what you will have is a capability for an authorizing official to look at some form of a dashboard, and imagine the difficulty in creating these dashboards, looking at everything, not only in updated security assessment reports and cybersecurity plan of actions and milestones. Again, it's the notion of the authorizing official needing to be continuously aware of the current state of cybersecurity for a given system. Now, I just want to briefly comment about this figure. First, if you look at the program manager's activities, they look pretty much like a typical system development lifecycle. But when you look at the cybersecurity activities, what you have initially is a cybersecurity plan and/or design, which is going to follow the various steps within the and task within the RMF. The IATT stands for Interim Authority to Test. This is where you're fielding a system where you're not 100% sure the controls work. Now, what you should pay attention to here is this idea of authorities to operate being continuously issued, either based on time or event. But notice what is being introduced. That is, at the very bottom, the defense industrial base's own cybersecurity. And this is the first time you're seeing a reference to CMMC. And one of the few times you will see a reference to CMMC. The focus is going to now be on supply chain risk management, which is procedure 4. Now, to me, reading and reviewing this document, procedure 4 is perhaps the most interesting because it introduces things that I have not seen before. The first procedure, as far as cybersecurity in the supply chain, is that program managers are going to be required to conduct supply chain risk management. Supply chain risk management is heavily referenced in 837 R2. You'll see probably in the not too distant future, cybersecurity framework profiles also being employed here. So one of the things that is going to be looked at are vendors. So vendors, suppliers to the Department of Defense, are going to need to consider, that is, the program managers are going to be considering the source of products that may be supplied to fulfill program requirements and seek alternatives to design of performance specification or other program requirements that may be necessitated by the use of sources owned by or controlled by or subject to the jurisdiction of a foreign adversary's government. And program managers are supposed to maintain a complete list of this. So an example where you might conceivably have a problem if you were using a cloud provider and the cloud provider was acquired by a foreign government who was adversarial in nature, that would be a problem. Program managers are now going to take action to maintain supply chain risk, including those associated with foreign ownership, control or influence concerns, commensurate with risk tolerance levels of the system or mission in question. Program managers are going to be conducting supply chain risk management to include cyber supply chain risk management to assess vendors, to see whether the vendors counter risk to and from a product by applying a framework for cybersecurity risk management due diligence. Supply chain risk tolerance is going to be very, very important to anything that is being produced. Now, I'd like you to pay particular attention to this next section. Supply chain risk management actions are going to be different based on risk tolerance levels. For higher risk tolerance systems, high risk tolerance applies to simplified procurements like computers at the Defense Commissary Agency, the cafeteria. In that case, your program manager, you are supposed to exercise caution regarding products originating from sources with identified foreign ownership, control, or influence concerns. Utilize approved product list. I put here a reference to an organization run by NIST called NIAP, which is associated with common criteria. So you have some assurance the product works the way it is supposed to. Maintain assurance through industry standards. The standards imply they have to be done. Balance risk against mission type. So once again, I have been in situations where mission triumphed. For moderate risk tolerance. Moderate risk tolerance applies to structured procedures like wireless networks at a forward deployed base. So you're looking at everything that was done for high risk tolerance and using verified vendor processes for product integrity. And here they're bringing up something I find to be very interesting. The notion that an SSAE 18 or a SOC 2 is an artifact that can verify a vendor's processes. Cloud providers already provide these. Improve awareness of vendor product limitations. Manage critical supply chain risk management risk through countermeasures. So in other words, maybe I'm going to do some additional testing on a given product. For very low risk for low risk tolerance, you're talking engineered procurements like industrial control systems in a tank. So you're looking at everything that preceded this, but now including assessing critical components, implementing available countermeasures, utilizing commercial assessment vendors, the Joint Federated Assurance Center, interagency and close and trusted international partners, national labs, FFRDCs, and intelligence and CI. For very low risk tolerance, which is the final one, it's talking about assured procurements like nuclear command and control systems. Program managers are going to implement everything, including following documents or requirements in Department of Defense Instruction 5200.44. And this is a very important NIST document to read. NIST Special Publication 800-161, which is Supply Chain Risk Management. So you're going to be conducting a criticality analysis, documenting the program protection plan, sending requests on critical components and suppliers to the DIA, SCRM, TAC, or other CI sources, flagging reports that come back critical, high, or select medium, utilizing the scoping mitigation processes to make mitigation decisions commensurate with risk. They would like you to use assured suppliers, so you're going to have to figure out how you're going to get on this list, or appropriate supply chain risk management countermeasures for system elements that perform mission critical functions. In alignment with Department of Defense Instruction 5244, cyber protection measures must, at a minimum, this is what the program managers are going to need to do. They're going to require software assurance, hardware assurance, procurement strategies, and a way to make sure that no counterfeit product comes into the environment. So it's anti-counterfeit practices. This is an important final thought. No source may be excluded from a procurement based upon supply chain risk management considerations, absent proper exercise of an appropriate legal authority. Any such exclusion must be coordinated with and approved by the contracting officer and counsel. Our final thought regarding this appreciation of 5090 is that 5090 is here. It is the law. It is what program managers are supposed to be doing. I'm sure many of you have heard of CMMC. At this particular point, 5090 is the rule that program managers are supposed to follow. If you are going to be selling to the Department of Defense, you need to make sure you understand NIST Special Publication 837R2. In particular, you are going to start being required to produce a series of policies which are going to be based upon your risk assessment of your own environment. You need to understand everything that is in the prepare for the organization before you actually start submitting things. You also should have a very good understanding of the requirements that are mentioned in NIST Special Publication 800-161, and from an engineering perspective in 800-160. These are going to be things that are going to be required going forward. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I do just want to make a note of a couple of references that you might find interesting. In particular, the President of the United States has recently issued several executive orders. It would be beneficial for you to understand that these are rules that are going to be passed on throughout the entire United States government. There is a new executive order that came out on the 12th of May about improving the nation's cybersecurity, where again, there were heavy references to supply chain. To understand the risk thinking of the Department of Defense, number 3, that is the Department of Defense Risk Issue and Opportunity Management, a guide for defense acquisition programs, I found to be a very fascinating document because it actually gives you the statistics and metrics used for determining what level of risk is acceptable. Procedures for Operational Test and Evaluation of Cybersecurity and Acquisition Programs is another useful document. And finally, the DoD's Cybersecurity Test and Evaluation Guidebook. This is what the products are going to be tested with, so it would be a very good idea on your part to take a look at it. Thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. If you have any other questions or comments, you can find my LinkedIn information at the beginning of this presentation. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you.